Hello, I'm Janet Prey with Islander Sewing Systems, and this is Cardigan Express. Cardigan Express has 3 different views in this pattern, A, B, and C. A is the 2 down here at the end. And you can see that at the very end, view A has a longer hem in the back. All of Cardigan Express have this wonderful raw edge seaming that we're going to show you how to do. They all have the exposed opposite side of the fabric, so it's important to have fabric that you like the looks of on both sides. View B is the same length in the front as it is in the back, and it does not have a cuff. It has a folded up hem, but we did fold it up to the right side to give a little contrast so it looks similar or the same as our collar where we've turned the fabric to the wrong side. So that is a view B. And an interesting thing we did here, which you can do with any of the views if you have a ribbed or a striped fabric, is to turn this middle piece in the opposite direction to create even more interest. Okay, and lastly we have view C. View C is longer than A and B. It has a cuff that we've used a ribbing that's dyed to match the French terry that we used. It has a lovely poofed out pocket. It's a real cute addition. It looks good and it's so functional. So that is view C. And I want to give you a couple of tips for success before we get started. So the first one is make sure that you read the suggested fabrics. Make sure that your fabric has 2 sides that are pleasant to look at and that the knit is stable enough that it's not extra stretchy. You want like a 20 or 30% stretch to your knit. And then I'm going to say watch the video portion of the pattern guide 1 time through, then cut out your garment and then watch each step before you do it. And you're bound to have a successful experience. So let's get started. When you choose your fabric, remember to follow the suggested fabrics, which is stable knits with a small amount of drape and good on both sides. So we want, because we're going to be seeing the wrong side or the opposite side of the fabric to create the contrast. You also want to know if you're going to be able to make a cuff out of the knit that you choose. And to know that it has to be at least a 50% stretch to the fabric. Well, how do I know if it has 50% stretch? Well, I'm going to show you right now how to determine any knit for any project, how much stretch is in it. So you want to fold it in half. You want to take a piece of the fabric, fold it in half, and this is the horizontal stretch test. So I'm going to, I don't want to start at either edge. So start somewhere past the edge. And I want to hold it here at 1, and then I'm going to grab it here at 4. And then I'm going to see how far it'll stretch. For every inch it stretches is another 25% of stretch. So from 4 to 5 would be 25% stretch. 4 to 6, and this one is really stressful to get it to the 6. So I would say that it was more like a 30% stretch on this one, just guessing. But to me, if I got to really pull tight, that is not going to be a comfortable cuff. So again, if I do it from 1 to 4, then I know every inch is another 25% stretch. Let's take a stretchier fabric. This is a viscose. This is some of our Italian viscose. And let's see how stretchy this is. Of course, we're not going to make a cardigan out of this, but this is just to give you the example. So, 25, 50, 75, almost 75. That's pulling kind of tight too. But certainly this has a lot more stretch than the previous one. So that's how you determine the stretch. So if you have a pattern and it says you need knit that stretches at least 30% or at least 50%. You'll know how to get that information yourself now. All right, we need to mark our pattern. So I've cut mine out, and you should refer to the pattern guide, the paper pattern guide that comes with this pattern, and it has the diagrams for cutting this pattern out. It is so simple. You just choose the pieces for your view, and you're going to cut 2 of each. So you fold your fabric in half and you cut accordingly. So it's very simple. And again, all the guides are, or the pattern layouts are in the guide. Okay, so what I want to do, and you know with Islander sewing systems, we usually use the industrial way of marking notches, which is to do a little 1/8 inch clip right here. On this fabric, I am concerned that sometimes as we're constructing it, we might stretch and that clip might grow. So I'm using the chalkener and I'm just marking them. Normally I would clip it, but when it's a very stretchy fabric, I worry that those could go beyond my seam allowance, that little clip. So if that concerns you too, use the chalkener to make your marks. And so you're going to mark the arm side of the front and the back. You're going to mark the 3 notches on the sleeve cap. There's 2 notches on the collar. And then for this one, I'm going to be constructing view C, which has a pocket. So I'm going to show you my favorite way of marking something that's in the middle of the pattern. It's not over on the side. We couldn't do clips if we wanted to. So I'm going to take these pins and I'm going to put it straight down. Make sure that you're going straight, not at some angle, because we want our pockets in identically the same place on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to pull those pins through there. Make sure they stay there. Now I'm just going to peel the paper back, and because this is on the surface, I want to mark it from the right side. So where that pin went in is what I want to know when I get done. So I'm going to mark where that pin went in, because that's the dot, if you will, that connects that would be the pocket placement. So you can move the pin around if you like so that you can get a real distinct mark. I'll show you. I do it a couple of different ways. So but as long as you get some kind of, like if you do this, you're pointing right at the spot the pin came out of. And then of course, because this is wrong sides together, I got to turn it over. If it was right sides together, we'd be able to mark them both by just opening up the stack of fabric and marking them both sides at the same time. Okay, so now I have my little points of where my pocket's going to go. That's very important, because when we get to that pocket, you may have read in the description that the pocket is a little bit slouchy. So what that means is our pocket's a little bit bigger at the top of the opening than the opening. And we're going to bring it in so that it slouches a little bit. So I'll show you that when we get into the construction. So get your pieces all cut out. And could you hand me that project box, Brenda? So, and if you're a regular with Islander sewing systems, you know that I use a project box. So in my project box, I will come and cut out my entire garment the night before. And then I will have all my pieces, and I usually leave the pattern piece with it. And I put all my pieces in here. And I know that all the notions I'm going to need. So I know I'm going to need stay tape, so I make sure that I have it. How many times have we thought, oh yeah, no problem, I've got that. And then you go and you realize, well yeah, I have it, but I only have 6 inches left. And it won't get it. I have my pattern guide, some of my notes, my thread, the sewing machine needles I'm going to use. Lots of them, just in case. And my favorite 1-inch ruler. We're going to use this a lot. 6-inch ruler for measuring 1 inch. Okay, did I forget anything for my project box? One of the big things when you're choosing your thread for your fabric is getting as close to the color of the fabric as absolutely possible. So when we're serging, we are not using serging thread in most cases. We're using regular construction thread because that gives you more variety, more color options, and you're more likely to be able to match the color. All right. Now you want to determine what size do you need. And every pattern, every garment maker, everybody in the world has a different way of determining size. So a number really doesn't mean anything. A size number, but a measurement makes a big difference. So what you want to do is you want to take your measurements, and then when you look at the pattern guide, you look at the body measurements that match yours, and then just below that you're going to find the finished garment measurements. And if you subtract your measurements from the finished garment measurements, you'll have how much ease is in that garment. So we've done just the bust ease for you as an example on this new Ultimate Pattern Guide, the text portion. And so what you'll see is maybe you're in a size range where you're going to get 2 inches of ease, and you really would like 3 or 4 inches of ease. You may need to move up to the next size. But that way, once you know how much ease is in there and how much you need, you'll be more comfortable in choosing the right size. Now, the last thing I want to go over is how to measure the sleeve length. On all of our patterns, we tell you what the sleeve length is. But our sleeve length is a professional dressmaker tailor's way of measuring a sleeve. So we are not measuring the sleeve pattern from the top of the sleeve to the wrist. That is not how you measure. We have to measure across the shoulder. So I'm going to do a demo and show you exactly how that's done. Okay, so to measure the sleeve, you want to start at the center of the back, which is if you find the person's neck and find the center of their neck, their spine, right here, that's where you start. You come across the shoulder. Now, Brenda's going to lift her arm up, thank you, and bring it up just a little bit more, so like a 90-degree angle to the floor, or like perpendicular to the floor. No, parallel to the floor. Jeez. All right, and then we're going to come down to the elbow, and that elbow needs to be bent, and then we're going to come straight down to the wrist. And Brenda's sleeve length is 32 inches. Now, that's long because Brenda is lucky enough to have very long arms and legs. So you'll check that measurement. So don't be concerned if it sounds like it's too long. Be sure to measure from here across the shoulder down around the bent elbow. We want to put the stay tape on the wrong side of the shoulders before we start constructing. This stay tape is a very nice, super fine, straight tape. Why do we put it on here? We put it on here so that our shoulders won't stretch out. And with knit fabrics, that's a very good possibility, especially if you hang them on hangers for any length of time. And because this is 3/8 of an inch wide, and our seam allowance is 3/8, we want to bring this down just about 1/8 or less from the edge, so that when we stitch, we'll be stitching just on the edge of this stay tape. We want to catch the stay tape, but we don't want to catch much of it. And then with a pressing cloth and a steam iron, just quickly give it a good press. Don't move the iron around. Give it some steam, and there you go. This step I'm about to show you is very important to the success of the garment. So before you start serging the raw edges of the 3 tiers of the front, do some samples. You want a 3-thread serging, and I put this through, and this would be the wrong side of my serging, and this would be the right side of my serging. So you decide which side you want facing the public, and I chose this side, which means that I will serge my pieces from the wrong side in order to have this on the very edge. This must be a 1/8 inch width. So be sure to adjust your serger if you need to on the 3-thread, and make sure it's 1/8, and make sure it looks real nice before you start serging. Because again, this is going to show on the right side. Alright, so let's just do one of these pieces here. And this is the upper front. And that's where your arm side is, you see. And we're going to serge finish the edge of this. So I'm going to turn it over because again, I want to serge from the wrong side. And that's my choice with my serger. You may have other choices. So I want to make sure that my blade is only running along the edge of the serging, so the most that's going to come off of there is some fuzz. But don't cut any fabric off, because I've drafted this to be 1/8. So it must be a 1/8 edge when we go to sew it together. Okay, so let's see. And yes, I do like the way that looks. And now it just needs to be pressed nice and flat before we stitch them together. So make sure that you follow this step and you do the bottom edge of all the 2 upper fronts. You do the bottom and the top edge of the middle, and then the top edge, I think I have a lower here, top edge of the lower front, which will already have the pocket attached to it. So you do all 6 of those pieces, follow the directions in the guide, and then we'll go to the next step. I almost forgot the pocket. We're going to serge all 4 sides around the pocket, and if you're making version B, then you're going to serge the bottom of the sleeve. The very edge. So, and again, if you're going to fold it to the right side, it's going to show. So take that into consideration. Remember I talked about the slouchy pocket. Well, one end is wider than the other by 1/4 of an inch. So you're going to see that here. And so we know the wider end is the top. That's going to fold over to the right side. So in this instance, I want to serge from the right side. And then the other 3 sides, I'm going to serge from the wrong side. And again, I am being very picky about which side of my serging shows on the right side of the garment. Remember, don't cut anything off because your pieces won't fit together if you start trimming off too much. Okay, we're still on step 2, but now I've put the 4th thread in the serger and adjusted it for a complete seam. So 2 things we have to do, and that, well, I'll start with the cuff. We want to fold our cuff in half. Now, if you're making the regular size, chances are your pattern piece is 8 inches by 8 inches. But remember, the ribbing goes the lengthwise, because this is our cuff and it needs to stretch that way. So remember, the ribbing goes this way, fold it in half, and then just accomplish a 4-thread seam. And this is very stretchy, so again, I'm using the differential. And you can just chain these right together if you want to do both of them at the same time. And remember, we're going to hang on to this. Those of you who might be new to Islander sewing systems, we are no pins, no basting, no kitting. But you do have to hang on to the fabric properly in order to do that. And when I can, I will call out some of those tips, but if you want to know more about sewing without pins and coming up with a much better looking garment, then take a look at the support materials we have on our website, including books and DVDs and USBs on sewing without pins or basting. Okay, so then we want to 4-thread serge the back, center back seam. I like to straight stitch first. It's not necessary for security of construction, but this, I like to be extremely accurate with my seam allowances, as we all should be. So when you're putting it through the serger, it can become a little gray area as to what's 3/8, what's 1/4, and how much do I cut off. So by straight stitching the 3/8 first, then I can come back and I can serge it, and I don't have to worry, am I cutting the right amount off? It's probably about 1/8 of an inch you'll need to cut off, but this way, if you have any difficulty or you're newer to a serger, straight stitch it first. And then you'll just know that you got it right and you can be comfortable. Okay, so there it is. And of course we'll need to press it, but that's in another step. Now you're going to take your 2 collar pieces, they're identical, and stitch them together, wrong sides together, because this is going to be a French seam. So you're going to stitch these wrong sides together at 1/4 of an inch. All right, before you start sewing, make sure you've done all the pressing. There's no substitute for that. So check step number 4 in your text of your pattern guide. Now, normally we would stitch, we're going to top stitch the seam down, but normally if it was a flatter fabric, we'd be stitching very close to the edge with what's called a needle width away. But because this fabric is lofty, and you can see by the back side, it creates more thickness to the fabric, it's better to top stitch about just under 1/4 of an inch. So we're calling that a scant 1/4 of an inch. And I'm stitching at just above a 3 stitch length. And we're just going to maintain that scant 1/4 of an inch. I think I'm a little very scant, but it's working. The idea is we just want to hold this seam down and keep it flat. It will always look nice that way, and it won't need any extra maintenance between wearing, like pressing. All right, got that done. Set that aside. And now you're going to take your 2 collar pieces, they're identical, and stitch them together, wrong sides together, because this is going to be a French seam. So you're going to stitch these wrong sides together at 1/4 of an inch. All right, and then we're going to put the pocket on. Okay, so this is the center back seam of the collar, and again, we've stitched it at 1/4 inch. Now, this is a French seam, and a traditional French seam uses up 5/8. So you sew the first at 1/4, then we're going to fold it to the other side and stitch it at 3/8. That works really well, again, with anything flat, like a shirting or something. But in this case, because again, we're so lofty, I felt it necessary to trim a little bit of this out before we stitch the second part of our French seam. There's a little corner, inside corner right here that I want you to clip all the way to the stitching. And then take about half the seam allowance out. And again, this is because it's so lofty and thick right there that it just becomes too bulky if we don't do this. All right, so got that out of there. Now we've pressed it over, and press it before you trim it because it's very difficult to press once you only have that teeny little edge in there. It wants to roll back and forth. It's not horrible, but save you a little aggravation by pressing first, then trim, and then we're going to make sure when you press it that you have that seam right on the edge. And then we're going to stitch now the 3/8 inch part of the seam. And if you've never done a French seam, what this does, and they use it a lot in fabrics that fray easily, like chiffon. They also use it a lot in shirting, but it completely encases all the raw edges. And therefore there are no raw edges to fray, curl, or pucker or cause you any trouble. So it's a really nice seam to use in a lot of cases. Make sure you turn that corner nice because we need this. This is what helps shape this collar. Okay, so there is your French seam. Okay, so we're making view C. So only view C has a pocket on it. So if you're making view C, here's what we're going to do. We've pressed our 1-inch hem over to the right side. And I'm not stitching it down. I'm leaving it loose. You could stitch it down if you like. And remember our little marks we made to give us an idea where the pocket goes. Now you're going to notice that the top marks are closer together than the pocket, and that's so that we can create that slouchy look. So we'll start the first side right at the mark it goes to. And you can do a reinforcement here if you like. Let's just go ahead and do a reinforcement to get started. So we'll stitch from the edge here. We'll go over 1, 2, 3 stitches. Ooh, 4, I guess. And then come back up to the top of the pocket, hem, and turn. Let's see if I got that up there or no. Come across to the edge. Now we're going to sew very close to the edge here, but don't sew so close that you run right off because you want your pocket to be secure. Now remember, thumb under, fingers on top, and I'm holding this bottom piece so it doesn't go through faster than the pocket, and that's exactly what the feed dog will do if you don't hang on to it. Okay, and then we're just going to come across, try to keep it nice and neat. Don't let anything stretch out of shape. Now, when we're going to come up here, you can see my marks all the way over here. I'm just going to ease this over. And that's what creates that little bit of, it's just a more useful pocket in a knit, especially because it gives you that gap. All right, and then we just go for home. And we're going to do the same thing at the top of this pocket, this side of the pocket that we did on the other one, which is to go over 4 stitches and back down. That'll give us that reinforcement that we need. And there's our pocket with just a little bit of a slouch, a little bit of a opening. All right, now the next thing is to construct the fronts. There's 3 pieces to each front. There's a lower. Now there's 2 different lower pieces depending on which views you're making. So there's the A and B view and the C view. This is the C because it's longer and it has the pocket. All right, so we're going to begin with the upper front. And we're going to lay the upper front on the middle front. And this is very unorthodox, but we're going to construct it just like that. But before we do that, I want to show you in an enlarged paper version of exactly what you're doing here. Because I want to match this thread so well that it's going to be more difficult on camera for you to see, I've created some paper versions. So let's say this is our middle and this is our upper front. And this is our 1/8 inch wide serging enlarged. You see this edge of the serging and this edge of the serging are what you're going to stitch on. So we're going to lay this right on top of that, and you see you'll be stitching right on here. So you just get those evened out, make sure they stay together where you want them, and then we're going to stitch right on that line right there. So here's where we're stitching. And we're going to just run with the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch right down that line. Okay? All right, now I'll show you how it's done. Okay, we'll put my magnifier on to make sure I can see what I'm doing. And I want to get these lined up. So I'm going to kind of peek here. So I'm going to kind of get the edges together and then fold this back to make sure that I've got it lined up properly. And that's all I'm worried about at the moment, is just the beginning and getting it lined up and getting my needle sunk into where I'm going to stitch. Because now my needle is going to hold that in place while I position. Now you can't just position this and go for it and think it's just going to stay there. But I do a lot of feeling with my fingertips. And I can tell that right from there to there is good. And I'm going to stitch right along that line. Do not stitch close to the edge here, because we want that to be raised up a little bit. That's what creates that little bit of texture. And that's what this Cardigan Express pattern's all about. It's just a fun make with a little unusual construction. And it actually is going to go together for you really fast. So we put that, and of course it needs a little pressing, but you see how it sits up there? That's what you want. And it's going to press down nicely. And then we're going to put the middle on top of the lower front. It's all about getting it started in the right place, and then everything else comes together. Okay, come back, make sure everything is lining up. Now, I had never constructed anything like this before, but I saw a few garments recently, kind of an athleisure wear look, and this is done a lot, or something similar to this, and it's kind of fun. They do a lot of raw edge where they don't even serge the edge, but I get tired of all the fraying and all the strings hanging from my garment. I've got one I bought on vacation, and it's real cute, but boy, it just constantly looks like it's coming apart because of all the threads hanging. So I kind of like this a little bit better. It's almost raw edge, but we don't have to worry about any curling or fraying. Okay, so now, of course, you're going to do both fronts. And now we have the fronts completed, and we have the back constructed. Now we're going to stitch the shoulder seams. So I have the fronts right side up on the machine bed. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because I want these pieces against the feed dog. And the reason I want these pieces against the feed dog as opposed to this side of the shoulder seam is this has been stabilized. And you always want to put against the feed dog the piece that's the loosest, the stretchiest, the most difficult to handle, the most bias. And in this case, it's the loosest. It's not been stabilized. So it can stretch. And it's better to have that against the feed dog. So we're just going to line these up, and we're going to stitch it at the 3/8 inch seam allowance. And remember, we want to just be catching, and if we put our tape on correctly, our stay tape, we should just be catching the very edge of that tape. Almost didn't catch it there. I think I'll go back and fix that later. All right, let's do this side. All right. And you notice I always get lined up, get it underneath the foot, and put the needle down. Then you come back and line up the rest of the seam. Those that have sewn their entire sewing career with pins are used to getting everything lined up before they put it in the machine. So that's a step that you will have to probably teach yourself. Okay, so we caught it. That's good because this is stable and we just want to barely catch that. If you put this down too low and you sew in the middle of that tape, then that tape is going to be cumbersome in the when this shoulder seam is pressed. It's not going to lay as flat and as nice. And of course, we don't want that. So in step 6, we serge this back shoulder seam. But again, just like with the back center back seam, I like to straight stitch it first and then serge it. You can do it either way. Of course, it's a faster construction if you serge it. And if you're comfortable and you know you can accomplish a 3/8 inch seam with your serger, there's no reason not to. But I try to give everyone the best construction, and some people are going to be less comfortable in cutting that edge off. Oh, look what happened. Well, we'll fix that later. I think one of my threads, oh, look. So I'll get that later, but you can see that we've serged that with the 4th thread now. So it looks really great and it's a nice straight seam. After pressing that French seam down, now we want to really flatten it as best we can. So we do that with top stitching, and we top stitch the very edge of this. So this is a needle width away or even closer, because we want this to be as flat as possible. It's very bulky, like I said, and we want it to look nice on the back of the and then we're going to press it again. But there, it's nice and flat as it's going to get. All right, now we're going to do that scant 1/4 inch top stitching across the shoulder seams, just like we did down the center back. So that's just a real quick. And again, my stitch length is at just a little bit over a 3. Oh, for heaven's sakes, whatever you do, don't stitch this at anything small. When the fabric is lofty and you stitch with a really small stitch, the stitches get sunk way down in the fabric, which isn't anywhere near as attractive. On top of that, Lord help you if you have to tear them out, because they're stuck down in there and they're very difficult to get out. So don't use anything smaller than a 3 here. Okay, so now what we want to do is actually sew the collar, which that shawl collar goes all the way the full length of the garment, and we want to sew it to the cardigan. So here we go. And there are notches on the collar that match up to the shoulder seam and this seam. So we don't have anything marked on the cardigan because the notches are, let's see, where are they? Oops. Let me go this way. All right. So we have a notch. The first notch is going to match right at this seam. You'll see it on the pattern. It shows there's a little notch there, but you don't need to mark it because it is actually ended up right at the seam allowance. So that's where that matches. Okay? And if you want, and I know that we don't use pins, but for those of you who might be new to pinless sewing, you may want to use 3 pins. And this is where I would use them. I would match up the center back and pin that, and then I would match up the other notch. So we've got 3 notches, and remember this, oops, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. There is a notch that goes to the shoulder, and I missed that one. So there is a notch that goes to the shoulder seam, so maybe we're going to have another pin. So then center back, and shoulder. And again, for those of you who sew like I do, and you don't need these pins, but I'm trying to help out someone who might be new to this concept. And in the beginning, you might need a couple of pins. Mickey Hudson, she's a certified teacher for us, and she says she allows her students 3 pins in their first class. Everybody gets 3 pins. So, okay. I guess we'll start over here. And now we're just going to sew this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now, I want you to, and I could have done this wrong. I don't know. Let me see. Here's where it gets confusing. Do you want this side to show? Or do you want this side to show for your collar? So here, I want the rough side to show, that textured side. So when my thing is finished, and then this is going to come around and trim the edge. So that's what my collar is going to look like. You might want to flip it around. In the case of the sweater knits, like the one I'm wearing, I did not flip it around because I preferred the ribbing look on this particular fabric. But on this one, I prefer the other side. So it's up to you, but make sure you are clear which one you want and that you're putting it against the cardigan correctly. Because this is two-sided, you could flip it around and not cut it the way you want it. So anyway, and we've done that. All right, 3/8, and we're just going to stitch a 3/8 inch seam. And remember, thumb under, fingers on top. Make sure all your edges are together. Your left hand is pushing down slightly to hold these fabrics together so they don't slide. And that's how we sew without pins. We don't have to be concerned because we are in control. The left hand is keeping the bottom layer from going through faster than the top. The right hand is, and the left hand is keeping the two pieces of fabric from sliding back and forth, also helping guide the seam allowance. So it's such a comfortable way to sew that I'm sure if you can try it a couple of times, you will see exactly what I mean. Another thing to keep in mind for the new pinless sewer people is that every notch must match. Every piece needs to be sewn at exactly the seam allowance that it was drafted for. We don't cut any corners. And actually, with pinless sewing, we come out with a better looking garment in the end. Okay, so now we've put our collar onto our cardigan. You could, again, serge that whole thing at one time instead of straight stitching. But I guess I've explained it, but I'll do it again. I'm doing this for those of you that may have less experience at the serger, or you might be more comfortable doing the straight stitch first. So either way, it's up to you. Again, much faster sew if you just serge it. So now I'm going to put the sleeves in. And again, I'm going to do this on straight stitch. And if you've never put a sleeve in without pins, then by all means do this on the straight stitch the first time. So this is my sleeve. So the sleeve goes against the feed dog. Always the sleeve goes against the feed dog. And we want to match up the first notch on the arm side to the sleeve. So there it is. And then we're just going to lay these together. And again, this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Alrighty. So we're going to just hold those notches together, and we're going to stitch up to that notch. And here's what, very important, I do not want you to straighten this out as you're sewing. You need to keep this curve. See that nice curve? That is there for a reason. And if you stretch it and stitch it straight, it will not lay nice anymore. So be sure to let that curve be the curve. So sew into the curve and move the fabric. Don't try to stretch it out. Now I'm going to come up here to the sleeve cap and find that notch and match it to the shoulder seam. Hold that in place. Now, you're going to see a little extra fabric out here. That is the sleeve cap, and that's the ease. So all we need to do is I'm going to put my hand underneath here, and I'm going to pull that sleeve back a little bit until the edges match. See this? And now I'm going to stitch it. And just what's happening is the feed dog are pulling all the ease in for you. So no more of that silliness of putting a basting thread in and pulling it up and putting 7,000 pins in and taking 7,000 pins out. Instead, you just let the feed dog do the easing for you. And when you understand that the feed dog do that naturally, you can use those feed dog to your benefit in so many cases. So again, if you want to know more about pinless sewing, send me an email, islandersewing@comcast.net, and ask Janet, and I will be happy to help you with that. All right, so again, we're going to pull that in. And this comes from the garment factory. This isn't something that I made up. This is the way shirt sleeves are put in large garment factories. Now this is not a high cap. This is not a couture garment. This is a casual, more flat cap sleeve. And that's why we can put it in this way. Alright, so you're going to do both sleeves and then take them to the serger and serge just like we did with the shoulder seam and the back, center back seam. So put both sleeves in, serge those seams, and now serge the seam that connected the collar to the cardigan as well. That's all for this step, and then we'll go to the pressing station. Alright, now we're going to press the seams down before we top stitch them. So we're going to press down the collar to the cardigan seam and also the sleeve to the cardigan seam. And then those all get top stitched that scant 1/4 inch away. And whenever you want to top stitch, you want that seam as flat as possible so that you can just glide across there and get a really nice straight top stitch. So using a clapper is the way to go. So you give the seam, get it where you want it, give it a lot of nice steam, and then come right behind it with the clapper and just push down. When you're pushing down, what's happening is the moisture is coming out of the fabric at the same time flattening it so it'll stay flat like that, so that your top stitching can be a lot cleaner, easier, and look nicer. Do that with the sleeve seam as well. Alright, now I'm going to do that scant 1/4 inch top stitching again, and this is the arm side or the sleeve, and so make sure that that seam is pressed toward the cardigan, not the sleeve, and then we can just top stitch it. And also remember to honor the curve, so don't try and straighten any of these curves out, and you'll have a beautiful looking sleeve when you get done. Just go with the curve. And of course, because we clapped that seam, it's laying nice and flat, and that makes it easier to do a good job. You're going to do both sleeves this way and also the collar to the cardigan. That scant 1/4 of an inch. Now that we've top stitched the arm side, the sleeve seam, and also top stitched where we attach the collar to the cardigan, now we're going to do the underarm and side seams. And they are a 3/8 inch seam like everything else. And we're going to serge those with a 4-thread serge. And if you want, again, you can straight stitch this first. I've decided I'm just going to serge it. Add 4-thread. Now, for those of you who are learning pinless sewing recently, you need an extension table on your serger or your serger in a cabinet, just the same as you do the sewing machine, in order to have complete control of your project. You will sew so much better and more comfortably. And you can see I'm holding that underarm pieces together because I am not going to compromise pieces being set together exactly as they were drafted, but I'm not going to waste my time using pins either. So you can do an excellent job, or sometimes even better job, by not sewing the traditional way. So we're going to do both sides. Oh boy, there we go. Longer table here. And this is what I mean. It's a little more difficult to do this and make sure you're accurate than it would be if you straight stitched it. So again, you decide if you want to do that first. Better safe than sorry. That's great. Do it that way. But if you've had a lot of practice and you feel real comfortable with the serger, just make sure you're using the 4-thread. 4-thread accomplishes a seam. A 3-thread does not. There is not a straight seam stitching going on with the 3-thread. So don't ever construct with a 3-thread alone. You'll still need a straight stitch or use the 4-thread. You can see I match up the ends and then I work my way back up, making sure all the pieces are fitting together, all the notches are matched if there are any. In this step, we're going to press the seams that we just accomplished toward the back. So the side seam and underarm seam toward the back. But here's a little trick that you might like to know about. And this works for sleeves as well as pant legs. So many times you want to press that seam, but the sleeve's so narrow, if I put my iron on here, I'm going to wrinkle up other parts of the sleeve or press creases where I don't want them. So by using a seam stick, this is our seam solution, which is nice and long, so it works really well for pant legs. And you just press right on top of that, and the only thing the iron is hitting is the rounded part of that seam stick. And the wood is sucking the moisture out, so the seam stays right where we want it to. Now we can top stitch very easily. So again, we're going to top stitch that scant quarter-inch away, and remember that's because it's a lofty fabric. Normally we wouldn't be stitching a lot closer to the seam edge there. So we want to do that scant quarter. And we're going to go all the way up. And we're going to go right down the sleeve. Okay, and this you just kind of have to walk your way down the sleeve. So we're just going to go as far as we can, make a nice smooth area, stitch down, and then move down some more. This again nails that seam down, makes it always lay flat, which makes your garment always hang nice. It's little details like this kind of top stitching that some people will feel that it isn't that important, and so they'll skip it, but it is more important than we realize. So there we go, and we have, you want to do that on both side seam underarm seams. Now it's time to put the cuff on the sleeve for views A and C. But before we do that, because we serged it, I'm going to clip it in the center to help me get a flat seam. The other thing you could have done is just straight stitch it and press the seam open, and it'll also lay flat. But if you've serged it, go ahead and fold it in half and clip right to the stitching. Now you're going to turn it right side out, but you're going to keep one seam going to the right and one to the left. And you can press that. I'm not going to take the time now, but go ahead. You could press it to make sure it stayed there. I'm going to try and hold it in place. But what this does is it allows us to have a very flat seam. Not only where we're attaching it, but where all the way down the cuff. So they're going in opposite directions. And now they'll lay nice and flat. And there won't be a lot of bulk right here because this seam is sewn to this seam. So you've got all this seam plus this one. So either stitch it, straight stitch and press it open, or clip it in the middle and turn it to either side so that you don't have that bulk. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to section this in half. So just fold it in half, and when you find the other exact half, put a pin in it. Okay? And then I've done the same thing with the sleeve. I folded the sleeve in half, and I put a pin at half. So this is half, that's half. So now I will slide the cuff down inside. So I've got the sleeve inside out, and I'm going to slide the cuff inside of that. And we know that we want these seams to be connected. Where are you? There you are. Making sure they're staying nice and flat. Center them with that seam. And then we want to match up this side as well. So match up those pins. Pin it in place. And now we know, I don't need a pin over here because I know where this all goes. It's all the seams go together. So I'm going to lay those seams all together, and I'm going to 4-thread serge this. Keep in mind you can straight stitch it first if you would like, but you do need this to be serged at the end of the process. Now, the cuff should be smaller, so you're going to stretch that cuff so that it fits nicely into your sleeve. Keep all your edges together. This is a 3/8 inch seam, so I am cutting off about 1/8 of the seam, because most sergers accomplish about 1/4 inch finished seam. Of course, there are sergers that can do much wider. And there's our cuff. Okay, we've got all that top stitching done, and now we're ready to do the hem all the way around. But before we do that, I want to show you what might have happened to yours. It happened slightly to mine, and that is at the seams, sometimes the fabric gets stretched and it changes the shape of our hem. So from stitching that down and then serging it and top stitching it, it can stretch. And some of us will stretch it more than others, and some fabrics will stretch more than others. So I want to show you how to fix that before you go to put up your hem. So fold it in half. Pull it this way, because we want it to be symmetrical. Anytime you're making a change, especially in a hem, but anything on a garment, you always want to do both sides at the same time, so you know that they're going to end up symmetrical. Okay, so you could take your pattern piece and lay it on here and recut, or you can take a curved ruler and you can see exactly what I need to do right here. So again, if you don't have the curved ruler, we do carry them, but you can also use your paper pattern to readjust any little imperfections that happened while you were stitching. And it can happen to anybody. It's just the nature of what happens with the knit fabric in the sewing machine. So that's pretty good right there. Okay. So now we're going to 3-thread finish this entire edge. So I'm going to go all the way around the garment. I'm going to 3-thread finish this entire circumference of the cardigan. So I'm going to go up around the collar and back down around the hem. And it's the same 3-thread as we use for constructing the front. So I'm going to stitch again from the wrong side. Okay. I just realized it isn't going to matter that much under these circumstances as it did on the other. It'll be fine. Remember, don't cut anything off other than a little bit of fuzz. The hem all the way around, including the collar, is 3/4 inch. But we found, because it is such a large circumference, that using the double-sided hem tape made it so much easier. So we have even included it in our kits. So the thing is that with the tape, it is very straight. It's not biased. So in order to come around some curves, you usually have to do a little bit of clipping. So we just clip, and you don't have to clip really close together, but you do need to clip near the other edge of the tape. So it looks kind of like that. About 1/4 inch, maybe a little more. And clip wherever you're going to want this to contour around a curve. And more clipping further won't hurt a thing on the straight edge. So if you have too many clips, it won't hurt. But alright, so we're going to start here at the edge. Get that stuck down good. And then I should be able to just move this around that curve nicely because of those clips. You see, there we go. And you can get right on the edge of that. See, I'm going to have a little bit more of a curve here. So I'm going to clip again. This isn't as severe, but I want to make sure that it lays nice. is pretty much a straightaway here, so I'm just going to go. So after we put the tape on, we want to measure the hem around, and I love this little ruler for this because I want it at 3/4 of an inch all the way around. So I'll measure the 3/4, and then I set the iron right on the edge to create a crease. Okay, don't try and press the whole thing, just create the crease. Okay, and you do that all the way around at 3/4 of an inch. Now, starting not all the way at the corner, because I got a little trick for you at the sewing machine for the corner, but just before the corner, you can pull the tape away now, and if you've just pressed here, the board is still warm enough that you can almost just press that into place, and if you see any imperfections, you can fix them now, and then press. And this will hold it in place for you to hem it. And you just do that all the way around. You just make sure before you hit it with the iron that it looks right. That looks right to me. All right, and just go all the way around. And then I'll show you that little trick at the corner for the mitering the corner. Okay, well, the last thing we have to do is just stitch all the way around this hem, which would be no problem whatsoever. However, when we get to the corner at the bottom of the collar, it looks really nice if you miter it as opposed to just doing a square corner. It hangs nice and it's much prettier. So let me show you how to do that. If it was a 90-degree angle, it'd be a lot easier, but it's not. So let me show you. I took a piece of paper and I traced out this part of the collar. You just need that little bottom part. And I marked off the 3/4 inch and the 3/4 inch, just what we have here. This is the exact mirror image of what's going on here. Okay, and we know it's got to go up 3/4. So I just, I clipped that. None of this is really relevant to the corner, but we're going to fold this up, and what you see is I have trimmed away right at that line, and let me see. This one here, yeah, you want to leave a little bit of, when you cut this one, because this one's going to sit up in here and fold this way, and then sit right over there like that. So let me show you again. We've got a little extra there. So what I did was I cut this straight down from this line, and then I came in leaving just enough to fold over there. And that way, when this comes up here, there's no raw edge down here. It gets folded into there, and this comes up, and this comes down. Now, if your fabric's really bulky, you could probably get rid of a little bit more of this. But do it in paper first to make sure that you're not, but now we can just come along. So you can see I've done it on the fabric right here. So that's why we didn't glue it down here and here. So I've trimmed that little funny shape out of there, and this folds up perfectly. But do it in paper first, or a scrap fabric, so that you are comfortable with it before you do it on your cardigan. And then what we want to do is top stitch this folded edge down all the way around the cardigan. So I like to start in one of the corners, and I start, ooh, I better get my magnifier so I can be sure that I get right on that edge, because you want to be
on this edge so you can nail it down flat. You don't want to be over from the edge because then it'll just not look as nice. See. Right on that edge. And then turn. And then just come up, stitching fairly close to that serged edge. And then you're going to go all the way around the garment. What's really nice is that we just have to guide it and carefully, but everything is stuck down for us. And it's not the kind of sticky stuff that's going to gum up your needle either. So it works really great. A good friend of ours developed this product, Lila Messenger. Her company is LJ Designs. And she used to teach a lot on the circuit. She's semi-retired now. But I just love that we have her stay tapes. And of course, you know how important it is, and I always talk about having this table surface, but you can see how far back I can get and stitch that far, readjust. You can't do that when you're only sewing on the little bed, right? Okay, so this one is not done yet, so I've got to do our little prep work here. And last time I just used my paper template here. This one. Let's see if I can do that again. Probably should have done it a few minutes ago before I got this far down, but that's not usually my style. Just this way. Alrighty. Okay, that's not up quite far enough there. There we go. That's going to look nice. And so now, we want to keep going all the way around the cardigan. So when I get to the second corner, this is my trick. You can do it whatever way you want, but I don't like broken rows of stitching. I like continuous if I can do it. So I'm going to come down here. And again, I want to nail this down. Turn around and come back and stitch in the ditch and go all the way around. Well, here it is, finished, and I just love it. I hope that you enjoyed making yours as much as I enjoyed designing the pattern for you. Remember, we're at Islander Sewing Systems. We're islandersewing.com. And if you have any questions that we can help you with relating to sewing or to any of our product line, please send me an email, islandersewing@comcast.net. Until next time, thank you so much and happy sewing!